Hello everybody, the Nameless Narcissist here once again. Simple man, diagnosed with NPD, giving you the facts of narcissistic personality disorder and the things that go on in my head. If you like this video, please like, comment, and subscribe, but keep in mind, I'm no clinician, so I can only speak to my own experiences and the studies that I read. Okay, so, if you're new here, you probably think I'm going to want to say some bullshit like, oh man, like narcissists think they have no problems, blah, 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 and that's why I don't go to therapy, and I hope after this, you'll realize I give a little bit more nuanced and hopefully more well-informed views. So, everybody hears that, right? People with narcissism don't go to therapy. They don't seek out therapy. And I always found this to be kind of a bizarre statement that didn't seem very substantiated. But I had you hear it even in studies. A lot of people will be like, in these studies will be like, oh, an issue with it is that they don't go into treatment. But I could never find any research to substantiate that. But recently, I came across an article written about the more recent research on NPD, which somebody please remind me to link that in the comments because I will forget. And since I pre-record these, I can't put comments in until after they drop. Anyways, and it's estimated that in terms of outpatient therapy, 6.5 to 20% of the individuals in there have NPD. And if you look at the stats, that's about 35 million people who are in therapy, currently, that's total. And at the lowest amounts, and I'm assuming that there's a prevalence of, this is the stats with 8.5%. That'd be 3.5 million people in therapy who are pathologically narcissistic. Then you also see that at the high, NPD has a prevalence rate of 0.5 to 6%. The 6% seems really high, and I do not believe that one for 2 seconds. But that would still mean that, let's say I estimated that 1 to 2% of the population has NPD. That seems reasonable to me. That means that around 6 million to 7 million people have NPD, at least in the United States. And at the highest estimates, 19 million people. And that would imply there are a lot of narcissists, and in some, depending on how the numbers actually are, I should have just averaged them out, but I want to be rather generous to the idea that, since it's repeated so often, I want to be generous to that idea, given that, a lot of clinicians say that too. This raises the question of why do we have this very common theme of narcissists don't go to treatment? And I have a couple of theories. The first one is how flawed the diagnostic criteria are nowadays. It's a very limiting, very limiting description of the disorder. That is, in essence, the most extreme versions of the diagnostic criteria. And until recently, a lot of research has been based off of that. For example, the NPI, the Narcissistic Personality Inventory, it was based off of those criteria, which had been neutered by the DSM-4 task force, I want to say, and represents a very homogenous population of basically assholes, right? People who don't really have subjective suffering. And I feel like a lot of people, when they encounter narcissists, that is the kind of person that they're looking for, even though that does not cover the full spectrum of narcissistic personality disorder. Another one is that the high dropout rate for narcissists, right? Around 50%. And that kind of makes sense when you think about it, right? Imagine how many people who are narcissistic, upon hearing that, will drop out of therapy because of the conceptions in modern society of what a narcissist is. I mean, it's the asshole disorder, right? And by the way, this isn't trying to delegitimize anybody who has been in a relationship with a narcissist and thinks that they didn't go to therapy. I'm sure your experience is valid. I'm just saying that it might not be as widespread of an issue as people think. And I want to point out that it's viewed as a lot of people who have mental conditions are treatment resistant. A lot of them don't seek help. I just am questioning now whether NPD is if it's that much worse than other disorders. For example, 39% of people with personality disorders seek treatment, and that's in general. And according to these stats, even at some of the most generous interpretations based on this idea that people like me just don't seek treatment, that's still a comparable number to how many narcissists are estimated to be in treatment. Again, 8.5 to 20%. That's fucking insane how it's overrepresented in outpatient. It's even hypothesized that people with NPD make up the biggest population in outpatient therapy, which makes sense. People with borderline make up the biggest demographic in inpatient therapy. So the fact that we are a little bit more high functioning than borderlines and that we would seek treatment in outpatient makes a lot of sense to me. And though I want to point out, though the dropout rate for NPD is very high, it's around 50%, which kind of goes along with the remission rate, right? Which kind of guarantees if they don't drop out, it will be successful, because the remission rate's around 53%. But with borderline, it's also it's substantially higher with narcissism, but with borderline, it's 30%. And I think it's just more the fact that personality disorders are egocentric. All of us are going to have issues like going to therapy because we're like, well, this is our personality. We think everybody thinks like this. But it's really, but like, I have never met somebody with a personality disorder that didn't think something was wrong at some point. And maybe with some people, they're just more introspective. But a lot of us go through subjective suffering. It makes sense that we would all, not all of us, but the majority of us would seek treatment at some time. It's really hard to say, honestly, but and a lot of this research is limited. A lot of this research probably doesn't reflect the reality. I mean, 50% of narcissists are misdiagnosed. That could also be a factor. Also, like, how many of these people were actually told their diagnosis? How many of these people were prevented from getting a diagnosis purely because of the stigma attached to the term NPD and how that could kind of fuck up their life in the wrong circumstances? For example, if you're in the Army and you get a personality disorder diagnosis, you will be kicked out. Hence why I avoided psych evals in the Army. But I don't know. This is a really hard one for me to really discern through, because you hear from everybody this. But again, I think it really is the homogenous population that the DSM actually includes. Because, and don't get me wrong, people like that exist and they are probably fit under the NPD category, but it only describes grandiose narcissism. And if you watch this channel for long enough, you know that people who are pathologically narcissistic fluctuate between grandiosity and vulnerability. I think a study that I read suggested that it was around 70% fluctuate between those two who have an NPD diagnosis. And I think that would be higher, but it was from the outside, like the family members and stuff were describing the behavior. And if they're being asked about narcissism, some of those people may be only looking at the traits that were inherently, like, that they would perceive to be narcissistic. So, I don't know. This is a really hard one because the research is very limited, but according to some people's clinical experience, this is what they state. But the research that's currently out doesn't really support that hypothesis. I'm really not sure where to go with this. I don't know. If anybody else has any theories about why the research reflects this, but then also in the case of like people's personal experience, that is also true. I mean, it's also possible that people are just bad at identifying narcissism, which they are. Research shows that only around like 5 to 10% of lay people can correctly identify somebody who's pathologically narcissistic. I bet a lot of people are just describing assholes. You know what I mean? Again, if you do have somebody who's narcissistic in your life and they have never sought treatment, I'm not going to say like, oh, that's wrong, because I'm sure you know the situation better than I do. But I don't know if that's as common as people think now. I don't know. Still figuring it out. Anyways, if you like this video, please like, comment, and subscribe. I know this is going to be a controversial one, but I would love to hear people's opinions. Again, I would love to hear people's opinions on why this might be. This is kind of a mystery now. Anyways, everybody have a good day. I had to start recording again because also take your fucking meds.